I want to remind everyone this is a forum and not a campaign rally or town hall meeting. Our goal is to maintain a calm and fair environment. Thus, we are asking the audience to refrain from demonstrations of approval or disapproval of statements made by the candidates. You'll have opportunities to thank the candidates as we end each part of our program. The rules agreed to by the candidates stipulate that there will be no audio or video recording or still photography by the audience except for representatives of the news media. I will now ask our panel to come to the stage. Kathy Treader is editor and co-publisher of the Ferdinand News and Spencer County Leader weekly newspapers. Bill Potter is general manager of DC Broadcasting, which operates WJTS-TV and radio stations WBDC, WAXL, and WRZR. Tyler Fiskus is a VU JC student majoring in business management. He's president of our Student Government Association and a veteran of the United States Air Force. The order of appearance for the candidates was determined earlier this evening by a draw of cards. First candidate to appear will be Dr. Larry Bucshon. Representative Bucshon currently serves in Congress from the 8th District of Indiana. He's a physician specializing in cardiothoracic surgery. He earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and completed medical school at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Dr. Bucshon is a veteran of the United States Navy Reserve, serving from 1989 to 1998. He was elected to public office for the first time in November of 2010. Dr. Bucshon and his wife, Catherine, have 4 children. For the next 18 minutes, the panel will engage the candidate in a conversation about his vision for our country.
Ready? Dr. Bucshon, and I'm asking you this as a physician.
Yeah.
If you were in charge right now of everything, the Ebola virus and the threat of Ebola in this nation,
Yeah.
Some say it's too much, some say not enough. How would you handle it?
Well, I think for the first of all, I do think that there needs to be a travel ban from the 3 affected countries. I think, you're looking at someone like the president, say, for example, that's in charge of public safety. Yes, would it be difficult potentially to make sure that we found everybody that originated there? Sure. But I think as a public policy person, your first goal is to really protect the public. So I think, with over 30 other countries, including Australia today, just banning travel, that would be my first step. The other thing is I think you do have to rely on experts in the field. I'm not a virologist, which this is a virus. So I would rely on the people that are specialists in viral diseases to give me advice on what approach to take. Right now we think that it's probably not airborne, but we really don't know. I remember in the 80s, I was a physician and I was in medical school when we first discovered the HIV in the early 80s, and once it became clear how it was spread, then you know what to do. But before that, you don't. And so you have to be extra cautious. So I think right now it's a mistake not to have a travel ban. I understand why the president is reluctant to do that. But the Doctors Caucus, 16 MDs that I'm a member of in Washington, sent a letter to the administration calling for a travel ban as a first step.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Tyler Fiskus. As a prior military member, I know how important it is to ensure that everything. Basically, I'm going to get straight to my question. How will you prevent government shutdown?
Excuse me?
How will you prevent government shutdown?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to have people that are willing to negotiate, in a divided government. We have divided government. The president and the Senate's controlled by the Democrat Party, and of course the House are controlled by the Republicans. So, when we have difficult budget issues, I think, there has to be give and take on both sides. And one thing you have to be willing to do is sit down and talk with the other side of the aisle, which the president was not willing to do. So I think, looking at that situation, from my perspective, I was not in favor of a government shutdown. Obviously, it's a bad approach. But, I'm only one of 435 members. When the president decided not to sit down and negotiate with House Republicans on the issue, then that's what happens. But I think cooler heads usually prevail. I don't think you'll see any more government shutdowns. I think that, both political parties recognize the fact the American people want us to move forward. And, they're really fed up with the stalemate in Washington. I'm part of a bipartisan working group, in Washington, D.C., and I've had some success working across the aisle on a number of things. So I think when you start getting people more like me and you start to recognize where the American people want the country to go, I don't think we're going to see any more problems with that.
Dr. Bucshon, you alluded to the sequester and bipartisanship. It just seems like it is so partisan in Washington, D.C., a whole different world there than it is anywhere else. How can we stop that? How can we stop parties going against each other for the sake of going against the other party? And how much does it look that way, but there's actually collusion going on under the table? Is there much of that goes on?
No, I wouldn't say there's anything going on under the table, but I would say that in Washington there's a more collegial attitude amongst the members of the House and the Senate than you see portrayed on TV, whether that's one side or the other portraying the situation. You know, I think that Congress right now is a reflection of the American people. And I think when the American people are wanting to drive the country in a direction where we cooperate and where we move the ball down the field, you'll start seeing more cooperation. I think we've gone through a period of time where there was pretty significant polarization in our country on how to solve some of the big issues. But I think that's softening, I really do. So I think the American people drive it. I think Congress is a reflection of the American people in every district. And I'm very optimistic that regardless of who wins the Senate or who wins the House in this election, that you'll see the ball move down the field. And I want to move the ball down the field. And I've said that previously. So behind the scenes, a lot of people talking, and I do think that if the American people continue to voice their opinion that we need to move the ball down the field, you'll see that happen. I'm very optimistic.
Can health care be fixed? I've heard from more people who said their health care is going way up next year or they're being cut. I know personally I have my own personal nightmare with health care. Can it be fixed or can it be gotten rid of as a government entity?
Well, you know, as you know, I'm on the record that I don't think the Affordable Care Act was the appropriate approach to health care reform, but we need health care reform. The biggest problem in health care is the cost. The cost continues to go up. Individuals and businesses can't afford it. And that's been going up in fairness before the Affordable Care Act. But the promise was the Affordable Care Act would get the cost down and people would be able to afford health care. That's not happening because all that the Affordable Care Act did is give someone a card in their pocket saying they have insurance but didn't address the cost. So how do you address the cost? You have to have more price transparency. The general public needs to know what things cost in health care. When you go to a hospital or a physician, you should know what that costs. And you should be able to compare, you know, in the elective setting, what the costs are and be a consumer. You also need more quality transparency. Look, as a provider, I'm all for quality transparency. You should be able to determine, you know, is a hospital doing a good job? Is a physician doing a good job? You combine price transparency, you combine quality transparency, and you open up the market nationwide for health insurance, you're going to start seeing the consumers drive down the cost. Until that happens, the government is not going to be able to get the cost down.
But couldn't I go to 10 hospitals in the area and get different prices for the same appendectomy or something? Or
You could, but here's the thing, right? At the end of the day, the competition is what drives the cost, right? I mean, if you're in a marketplace, whether it's healthcare or whether it's something else, and your prices are not competitive, you don't stay in business. So, you know, right now, healthcare, you can't do that. You can't compare cost. You can't compare quality very well. And, you know, those are big picture things that need to be done. On my official website, there's a lot of other ideas that I have on healthcare. But I do think it can be fixed, but it's going to take time. And there is no silver bullet. I wish there was, but there really isn't. Yeah.
Is the No Child Left Behind Act helping this?
A combination. I'm on the Education and Workforce Committee, and we have jurisdiction over the No Child Left Behind. I think what No Child Left Behind, you know, remember, it was put in under a Republican president, and Speaker Boehner, current Speaker Boehner, was chairman of the committee at the time. So this was a bipartisan effort that was necessary to try to help get our education system on track, right? Because if you compare what our students do compared to the rest of the world, we're not as strong, right? So there are good things. Well, I think one of the good things is it did bring it to the forefront, so everybody's thinking about education. Everybody's talking about what we can do to improve the quality of education for all of our students. And the other thing it's done, it's starting to open up parental choice. We just passed out of committee and off the House floor a reauthorization at the federal level for charter schools, for example, and that was a bipartisan vote because everybody realizes that, you know, we need to have parental choice. And how you do that state by state, it's different. Certain states do it differently than others. But those are the good things that came out of No Child Left Behind. Now, there are some quality data issues with what was put in place as far as the quality of our schools. And if we go along with what the No Child Left Behind law says today, over 80% of our schools will be considered failing by 2015 or 2016. And of course, that's not true. So there needs to be some changes in the law. And we've tried to do that in the House, and we have. But really, we haven't been able to get a bipartisan agreement on how to do it. So it's a two-edged sword. I mean, it's good, but there are some parts that need to be changed.
Thank you.
Dr. Bucshon, foreign policy seems to be something that the White House has to deal with a lot. What part should Congress be playing in foreign policy?
Well, you know, as you know, in our form of government, primarily it's the administration that deals with foreign policy through the State Department and the White House. I think Congress is in an advise and consent mode. That Congress needs to be engaged anytime you have significant foreign policy issues that affect the country, affect how much money we're spending also, because that's one of the main things we do in Congress, as you know. But I think it's very important as representatives of people that we're engaged in foreign policy with the White House and with the State Department and the administration. And I think for the most part, over the course of history, you see a lot of that. Mostly on the Senate side. You don't get as much engagement on the House side. Now, you might if you're on the House Intelligence Committee or the Armed Services Committee. I'm not on either one of those. But I think Congress is very important, more as an advise and consent. And I do think that it's prudent for presidents to get authorization if they're going to use military force in a substantial way. We had authorization by the Congress in 2001 and 2002 for both the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War in a bipartisan vote. And at this point, with what's happening in the Middle East, the President says those authorizations continue to give him authorization to do what we're doing with airstrikes. And for the most part, I agree with that. But I do think we're going to see a significant discussion on how we move forward. So Congress is very important, but primarily the administration, any administration, is the one that deal with that.
I'd like to piggyback on that. We've recently witnessed, fortunately we haven't truly witnessed the horrors of beheadings of very innocent people.
Yeah.
And our policy is we don't negotiate with terrorists.
That's correct.
Do you agree with that policy? I mean, this
Absolutely.
is
I think I do agree with that policy. And the reason is because if you don't hold true to that, it'll result in even more death. And because what will happen then, you will really unleash people all over the world that think that they can kidnap people and hold them ransom to the United States of America. So, you know, I think that it is a policy that has been in place for a reason. I agree with it. You know, it's tough because you have individual U.S. citizens who are being held. But I think you have to, as a policymaker like myself, you have to try to keep your eye on the big picture about what the United States represents and what is good in the long term for our country and for the good of our people. And that's not to negotiate with terrorists.
Do we need to get boots on the ground?
Right now, I think we need to rely on our military commanders to tell us what to do. At this point, they're saying no. Again, I'm not on the committees of jurisdiction. I've been through some classified briefings, so I understand some of what's happening at a fairly high level. But at this point, you know, the Congress passed, before we left for the August recess, authorizing the President to train and equip Kurds, Syrian people who are on our side, but that's questionable who's on our side. They flip around a little bit. And also to help rejuvenate the Iraq Army itself, to do the boots on the ground fighting and support that with special forces and airstrikes. And I think at this point, we need to see what our commanders tell us if it's working or not.
Well, just to get back on that question, should we continue to be the world police in the Middle East?
What I see us, I think world police is not the right term. What I see us, the United States, is the defender of liberty and freedom in the world. And I do think we should continue to be the defender of liberty and freedom in the world. If not us, who? And I think if you look at historically what happens when the United States backs away from having a strong presence, potential presence militarily and otherwise, diplomatically, you see that you have problems in the world. Part of the reason Putin felt like he could go into Crimea, I think, is a perceived weakness on the United States' part from the administration about what we would do if that were the case. So I don't see us as policemen of the world, and we should not be engaged in police activity. But we should defend liberty and freedom for our own people and for our allies around the world.
In this situation with the Ukraine, are sanctions the way to go against Russia, or is there a bigger threat there that we don't realize? How would you have handled it?
Well, I think Vladimir Putin, wants to reconstruct the USSR. I mean, he's former KGB, and his idea is expansionism in Eastern Europe. And I do think that, some of the things we did early on in the Obama administration by backing away from missile defense systems in Eastern Europe was a mistake. Now, you can argue that point back and forth, but Putin is not going to do things based on diplomacy. Putin needs to have someone to counteract what he's trying to do. I'm not saying you do things militarily, but you do things in a defensive way that you show we're going to protect our NATO allies, we're going to protect Eastern Europe, and if you want to continue to be a player on the world stage, then you're going to have to, play well in the sandbox, so to speak, with others. I think that's what the approach you have to take. I think a weak approach by saying, please don't do it, doesn't work. It never has for people like Putin. And I think we've made a big mistake in a lot of areas in Eastern Europe, not making sure that our allies know that we're strong.
Is that situation still a threat?
I think it is a threat. And I think, the sanctions put in place, first of all, Europe depends on a lot of oil and natural gas from Russia. So the sanctions aren't as strong as they probably could be because our allies in the region can't do it. I mean, economically, they just can't give up the flow of oil or natural gas and other things from Russia, right? So, what can we do in addition to the sanctions, in addition to making sure we have a strong presence in Eastern Europe? We can start providing liquid natural gas, for example, to our allies and compete with the Russians and show Russia that, hey, if you're not going to play well in the international community, then we have the resources in our country to supply Eastern Europe, and your economy is going to be in trouble. I mean, the Russian economy depends big time on energy. And that's the play I think you make. You make an energy play.
Why should we vote for you next Tuesday?
That's a good question.
Almost 2 minutes.
I got plenty of time. Well, as you know, I was a heart surgeon before I was in Congress. And I wasn't elected or ran for any office at any level. And I ran at the time because I thought people like myself need to step out of their comfort zone, step out of their regular everyday job like the Founding Fathers wanted us to do and run for office. And that's what I did. I ran because I think we needed more of a healthcare voice in Congress, and I'm a healthcare provider, as you know. I also thought at the time, and I still think, that the federal government continues to pick winners and losers. That instead of letting the free market economy work, we're picking winners and losers, specifically what happened with some bailouts of big companies at the time. And I don't think the country is going in the right direction. And I didn't then, and I don't now. Since I've been in Congress, I've done what I said I would. I have a conservative voting record, but I'm willing to work with people. I've had a lot of influence on health care, which I said I would, and I have. I've defended our energy industry in our state, including the coal mines and the manufacturing base that relies on low-cost energy. I've been a big supporter of our ag industry. You may or may not know, I'm a friend of the Farm Bureau, which is an area, the farmers in our district are a big part of who I represent. So I've gone there and done what I said I would do. And I've been honest about it, and you can trust me. And when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And I think that most people think that I'm very approachable, and that's the way it should be. The other thing we've done is focus really hard on constituent services. When people call our office, we act, we respond, and I think people appreciate that. I'd appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bucshon. Next candidate is Andrew Horning. Andy Horning has worked in cardiovascular health care since 1979 in research, clinical, and industry product development and education roles. A former cartoonist, Horning also does medical illustration and has taught anatomy, physiology, and ultrasound physics. Andy works from his small farm in Freedom, Indiana. He and his wife have 4 sons and a daughter. The panel will now engage in conversation with Mr. Horning.
Mr. Horning, what do you think is the biggest threat facing the United States?
Well, actually, it's corruption. And, you know, you think about 100 years ago when Woodrow Wilson said it, you know, when he said that our country had become the most corrupt in the civilized world, what he was talking about is the same thing that Eisenhower later said with the military-industrial complex and with, you know, what Kennedy was talking about with the men behind the curtain and how he wanted to bust up the FBI and scatter it to the wind. You know, I think if you were to find common ground between the Occupy Wall Street people and the Tea Party people, most of them would, you know, say that our country has been sort of sold out, and it happened a long time ago. And you can look at the campaign finance reports and see exactly how that works. You can look to see that it's actually fairly inexpensive for, you know, a special interest of any kind, whether it's a banking industry or something, to you know, to buy a few key people, you know, a few key chairmen, the party leaders, and you're done. You know, you don't have to buy out all of the representatives. You don't have to make everybody corrupt. It doesn't have to work like that. But because we have a system that, you know, unfortunately, we don't really pay attention to politics very much. Most voters have not read the constitutions. We have not really, you know, followed the campaign finance reports to see who's getting money from where. It's easy for the people who have some desire to buy some of that government power that we keep throwing to Washington, D.C., to do just that. And so every time government gets a new power, it becomes a new attraction for people to buy a piece of it and use it for their own purposes. Now, this is ancient. You know, we knew that this happened, you know, back before the Civil War. We knew that, you know, after the federal laws increasingly federalized corporate laws, that whole business of the railroad barons and so on that we complain about, that was the federalization of public policy such that the AMA became the most powerful union in the world, and their purpose was to increase the cost of health care and to reduce competition. So the allopaths and the osteopaths got together and they bought themselves some politicians, and they were able to make health care more expensive. Now, this is way before health care was even effective. So, you know, the average doctor couldn't even, you know, help the average ailment until 1920. And I'm telling you all of this because this is a long-standing problem in the United States that we all really know about. We know our government's corrupt, right? And yet, what do we do every election day? We say, attaboy. We vote for the same people that are in charge. So if you vote for even the best Democrats or Republicans now, the people in charge will still be the people in charge. And that's not what we should be doing with our power to vote, which is, after all, the power of peaceful revolution. And we should be wielding our vote like that weapon so we can get rid of this ancient problem in the United States of corruption. And we've known about it. It's time to deal with it. Everything else is just a symptom.
Along that line, people just will keep voting that way. Mm-hmm. Should we have term limits? Should we have restrictions on what lobbyists can spend? I know there might be some now and some restrictions, but are there really? Is that an answer?
If you ask the politicians to regulate themselves, you're kind of making a mistake right there. And so when we ask for incumbents to give us term limits, what are we thinking? You know, look at what's happened. How many people ask for term limits, but then the incumbent re-election rate has gone up? So you have an over 90% incumbent re-election rate. How is that supposed to work? That makes no sense. There is no procedural fix for bad decisions. And those bad decisions are being taken place, in the voting booth. It's voters who have been choosing the direction of our country. Now, I don't mean to go on a negative attack campaign against voters. That probably wouldn't work very well. But the idea here is that we have to take accountability for what we've been doing, and we have power that we're not using in the voting booth, and we have accountability that goes along with it. So when we get into a voting booth and we're just numbly pressing buttons because that's what we always did, my pappy voted Democrat, I'm going to vote Democrat, we are part of the problem. We're not just part of the problem, we are the problem. I've done it, everybody's done it, where you go in and you vote out of habit, you vote out of ignorance, you haven't done your homework, you haven't asked these people any questions, and we wouldn't hire a janitor like that. You would never expect to hire anybody without doing interviews and finding out something about what they're going to do to make sure you can trust them. But with politicians who are sending our children off to die in battle, we don't ask them any questions. We don't show up to public forums. It's one of those things that, we have lots of power, but we're not using it. And my hope when I run as a libertarian is that we are going to use that power, and I want to present an option for people to vote for something different. And you can't vote for something different by voting for the same Democrat and Republican false dichotomies.
How would you fix the economy? I mean, that's a lengthy question, and I don't want to, but I'm sure you have some ideas of how this could be improved.
It's easy. Get politics out of it. And the thing that you hear from both Democrats and Republicans who love to divide and conquer, and their stock in trade is to divide us up into different tribes, and so it's the shirts versus the skins. And so, black people vote this way, white people vote this way, women vote this way, men vote this way. We're always dividing each other up. And the reason for that is because we've given everything to politics. And so politics has a stake in everything. What I want to see happen, however, is to let doctors be doctors, let scientists be scientists, let engineers be engineers, let businessmen do business. So if you wanted to start up your business, you just start up your business. You don't have to hire a lawyer. You don't have to get a whole bunch of paperwork. You don't have to say, am I going to be a 501c3, or what is my incorporation entity going to look like? If we were to just get politics out, if we were to stop praying to this God of Caesar and start doing what we do best, we would see that what worked before in the United States, a government on a leash to some degree, is what would still work better than anything else anybody had ever tried. This is not new science. There's nothing, that hasn't been tried for thousands of years, and we have seen it wherever you put a leash on politics to any degree at all, whether it's Hammurabi's code or Urukagina's code, for thousands of years. We see that's when people flower. That's when there's a flourishing in business and trade, when you put a leash on these people who are sending out tax collectors and gobbling up the wealth of the nation.
Couldn't it be said, though, the same for health care?
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
when I was a kid, you went to the doctor, they might have had a nurse, they might have had a receptionist. If they were a big practice, you paid for it. They didn't have 16 people.
Well, absolutely. Well, there's a fixed cost for, there's a tremendous overhead for healthcare, not just for in the doctor's office, which you see. All of the HIPAA stuff, all of the insurance paperwork, all of that's obvious. What is not so obvious is where my part of the healthcare industry came in, where we can bring a product to market twice as fast in Italy as we can in the United States now. That's embarrassing. I love Italians, don't get me wrong. But if you're losing jobs to Italians, you're doing something wrong. And so we have been screwing up with our taxation, regulation, litigation in every aspect of human existence, whether it's, industry or marriage, where we ask, when a minister says, I now pronounce you man and wife, he says, by the power vested in me by who? It's not by God, it's by Caesar, by the state of Indiana or whatever. We have put politics into everything. And anytime you have politics get into it, you're going to have all of these, you don't even know what the terms are going to be, even with marriage. You don't know what's going to change in the future, what Social Security and bereavement pay and visitation rights and property rights, all of these things get attached, but the minister never talks about that. The same thing in healthcare. You don't see all of this stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and where every place, with pharmaceutical companies where they've got this $40 billion pipeline that they have to pay for within 7 years, but now we say, well, we want to get our drugs from Canada because they're cheaper. They don't have a pipeline. All of their development is dead now. They depend on the United States to come up with all the new drugs, and when they go off patent, they make their money and we lose money on this side. We're not thinking about what politics has done to destroy patent protection, it has done to destroy destroy profits and is done to destroy motivation for people to start their businesses to begin with.
Do you believe it's pushing companies out of the U.S.?
Well, in my industry, that happened exactly. You know, I worked in the medical imaging device sector, and we were, you know, like designing medical ultrasound devices where we had most of the products were being bought in the United States. Nearly all of them were being designed and built in the United States up through the 1990s. And then within a period of about 10 years, because it became, you know, no longer feasible to build them here, we started building them elsewhere. So we lost some jobs to, you know, not just China or Japan, but to the Netherlands and to Israel and Germany. And then we lost not just the manufacturer, but the engineering too. So it's now the case that in many key industries, if you can do it any place else in the world, why would you do it in the United States? Why would you? You know, it's not just capital that's mobile. You can actually export engineering and labor and everything. And all of this stuff is mobile all over the world. It's always been a global economy. There's nothing new about that. This goes back thousands of years too. But what we have done is we have taken the recipe that used to work for the United States, which was put government on a leash and let people do their business, and we've inverted it. And we've gone way back. We've gone back 3,500 years before Hammurabi wrote down his 282 laws. And now we have no laws. Nobody reads the constitutions. Politicians don't care about writing laws that are in contravention of the Constitution. They just spit these things out like watermelon seeds without having seen what effect they have on all the other laws the previous guys wrote. And that is making a terrible tangle for people to try to figure out, how do I start a business? Which laws are going to apply to me? And when are they going to come and get me because I'm disobeying a law I haven't even seen before?
Mr. Horning, then, we know where we are. We know how we got there. How do we get out of it? Because a lot of what you're talking about, we're so entrenched, and there are so many government jobs that rely on that bureaucracy. There are so many in the health industry, additional jobs that are there, they exist because of this. How do we get out of that?
Well, you know, we have a bizarre paradigm where you even have special interest groups like the NRA. If they ever accomplish their objectives, they'd all be out of a job, right? Same thing with any special interest group. Once they start hiring secretaries and you've got a chairman and you've appointed all these people who are now making salaries off of it, they don't want to solve the problem that they propose to solve because that would be the end of their whole business. What we have done, in other words, is by giving everything over to politics, we've created a paradigm where it seems like it's self-sustaining, but we keep voting for it. This is just a choice. And I guess what I'm proposing is a different vision for America that is more like America used to be, where it's not, you know, just simply self-reliance, because, you know, it's never been the case that Americans were just left on their own. We used to have churches and Kiwanis and Rotary clubs building parks and schools and bridges and monuments and all this stuff. Before income tax, we had, you know, more public transportation than we do today. Like Indianapolis, for instance, until the 1920s, was they had more public transportation than just about anywhere else in the world. And because we have funneled everything to government, we have changed our vision for how things work such that now most Americans have no idea how liberty would work. We have no concept of freedom. And what I'm trying to offer is a different vision for how America could work without all this fear-aggression syndrome of constant war, and you need government because you're scared, and Korea is going to come and get you, and now it's going to be Ebola, and you know, you have to worry about the Russians. They're getting uppity again, and you know, who knows? We might have to smack down France. They've had it coming for them quite a while. So we've always got fear, 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 fear. And so we're told that this government is necessary when, what the heck happened to this country? Where's the John Wayne spirit of, you know, I can handle this stuff myself. I can start my own business. I'm not afraid of these guys with exploding underpants overseas. I can take them right here. And in fact, we've gotten to the preposterous position where, you know, statistically, because we've militarized our police and we've got the world's highest percentage of citizens in prison, and we've got more things illegal here than anywhere else in the world, you're more likely to get shot by a police officer than by a terrorist. And that's an embarrassing thing. You know, in the land of the free, to have the world's highest percentage of citizens in prison is bad enough. But to think how many liberties we have lost since 9/11 and how much of the Constitution has been compromised, you don't even hear politicians talk about the Constitution. I've got it posted on my website, both Indiana Constitution and U.S. Constitution, and I've annotated them because I want you to see how I read those laws, how I respect those laws, and how I wish we had them back. because those are the leash on politicians that we could just, they're law already. That is already the law. We could use it whenever we want. All we have to do is say no to this ridiculous monstrosity we've created so far, and say yes to constitutional rule of law, which is ours for the taking.
You're a Libertarian candidate. What if you win? What are you going to do?
You know, one of those things that people have to understand is that even though I would only be 1 out of 435, it's not me that would have been making the statement here. Voters would have been sending an unmistakable message by saying no to what they've been doing for 100 years, and to suddenly change, you know, for voters to say no to Democrats and Republicans and all of a sudden vote, what? A Libertarian? You think that would not be something that, who would miss that? There would be cracks in marble everywhere in Washington, D.C. The whole town would turn upside down. K Street is mostly lobbyists. 50% of them are there to tweak the tax code for their clients. And when they see that there's a new player now, and this is a new party, it's not me. Voters did this. Voters got disgusted with the way things are. They got disgusted with the corruption, and they chose something else. That would be a revolution. That would be a vote heard around the world. That would not be me. You know, I'm just, you know, I'm offering a choice. I'm standing up on the ballot, you know, to be that choice. But it would be voters who did all the heavy lifting. And nobody in Washington would be, that would not be a mistakable message.
Well, if you did get elected, who would you caucus with?
Well, you know, people have asked me that caucus question as though we're supposed to have caucuses anyway. You know, it's supposed to be the case that you send these representatives to represent a district. Right. And so I'm supposed to do this. Basically what we're talking about is Democrats and Republicans have been ganging up, you know, in various ways for 100 years now. And they have written rules related to that ganging up process where people sort of, you know, you have precinct committee people who work for a candidate knowing that that's going to be in a job for their kid on the highway department, and all these little bits of paying back. You know, the one invariable rule in politics is you dance with the one that brung you. And so everybody's got to scratch each other's back and all of this stuff. But it's all wrong, right? From the bottom up and from the top down, it's all a species of corruption. And what we should be looking at instead is how do we stop this business and get back to one man, one vote. It's even the case now that, you know, the chairman and all these people, you don't have, like I said before, you don't have to buy off very many people to control all of Congress. And it's, I don't want to, I guess to more directly answer your question, I don't think I'm going to be allowed to, you know, it's not like I wouldn't try to reach out to some of the liberty-oriented members of Congress, and there are plenty. They're on both sides of the aisle. There are people I would agree with. There are people who are against war. I'm against war. There are people who are pro, you know, free market. I'm pro that. And there are some people like Justin Amash of Michigan that I probably would have lunch with on the first day and you know, be friends with him. What does that mean in caucus, though? I would probably, you know, I'll just tell you honestly, you send me to Washington, D.C., and I would not be very well liked by an awful lot of the people there because they would know what I represent. I would represent a thorn in their side. I would represent something they would very much like to kick out of their halls of power and do away with.
Even though it's based on our Constitution?
Nah, you know, if I were to take a poll, how many people in the 8th District have read the Constitution, that's bad enough. But we send people who have no interest in the Constitution because, you know, we should be reading the Constitution as citizens, but the point of constitutions is a leash on whom? It's not a leash on voters, it's a leash on politicians. And so are politicians going to be begging for that leash? It's like a bad dog begging for the leash. They're not going to do it. We have to demand it. And so in order for us to have any sort of pinning to the constitutional rule of law, voters are going to have to, first of all, read the Constitution, understand what it means, because we have, you know, we read all kinds of sports statistics, we know about celebrity babies, all kinds. It takes only an hour to read the U.S. Constitution. And if you read the U.S. Constitution, you will be an expert. You know, you could be on CNN as an expert because you've read that thing. Most people have not. And if you were to demand that then, you know, ask your politicians, have you read the Constitution? And test them. Ask them questions related to that. You know, if we were to just do that simple thing and demand the laws that are already ours, that would be a huge revolution, and it would be a successful revolution, and it would make this nation successful once again.
Thank you, Mr. Horning.
Thank you.
Third candidate to appear will be Tom Spangler. Tom Spangler is the owner of LUI Corporation, a producer of custom furniture solutions for commercial, small business, government, healthcare, education, and religious applications. Prior to purchasing LUI, Mr. Spangler managed the commercial furniture division for Lazy Boy. Tom and Penny, his wife of 43 years, reside in Jasper. Our panel will now engage in a conversation for 18 minutes.
Mr. Spangler, hello. Hi, Bill. You're not the typical, I don't mean to, I guess, stereotype is what we all do, Democrat running for office. How do you see yourself?
Well, I think you summed it up pretty well. I'm not the typical, okay? And I'm also not a politician. This is the first time I've ever run for public office. And when I started looking at this, it really goes back to September the 17th of last year. In fact, our congressman was here. He was here before the government shutdown to have a listening time with his constituents. And it was at that point where he was asked a question, and that was there going to be a government shutdown? And he told us, and this was conducted in the new manufacturing tech facility, less than 100 yards from here, that there would not be a government shutdown. And then the question was asked of our congressman, well, would you vote for a government shutdown? And he said that he would not. Consequently, we all know what happened a few weeks later, that there was a government shutdown. It lasted 17 days. It enraged me. It got me angry, because I'm a small business guy. And so I started looking at what could I do? How could I make a change? And so, as a person of faith, prayer is very important. I started praying about it. And the government came back from a shutdown on October the 17th. And October the 20th was Sunday, and our pastor was preaching on Romans 13, which is where Paul was talking about the fact that we need to give respect to our leaders, that God has put in place our leaders, whether they're good or bad. And that was a defining moment for me. That was a defining moment for me to say, I want to do something. So I contacted our local party chairman, the Democrat Party chairman, Gary Eck, and I also talked with Anthony Long, who's the district manager, and I also talked with John Zodi, the chairman of the Democratic Party. And I said to John, John, I am not your typical Democrat candidate. First of all, I'm pro-life. I believe that abortion is murder, and life begins at conception. And I says, that does not line up with the Democratic Party very well. I said, secondly, I've been married for 44 years, well, 43 years then, and I definitely know the definition of marriage. And I know that doesn't line up. And I said, so I don't know if you really want me to run in the Democratic Party. And John looked at me and he says, Tom, he says, if we were in California, he says, I wouldn't even be talking to you. It's a much more liberal state. But we're here in southern Indiana. We know your district, and we know that you resemble a lot of the people that are here in the 8th District. And we are a party that is evolving. And we feel, and we would not stand in your way to run for office for Congress. In fact, we would be very happy and proud if you would run. Personally, he could have been thinking, Bill, that I would get knocked off in the primary, okay, and I would not be the congressional candidate, but we also saw what happened there, is the fact that one other person filed, and he got thrown out because he didn't file correctly, and so I was the candidate. So you're exactly right. You've turned me right. I am not the typical Democratic candidate. You know, my faith is very important, and I stand by what I believe. My party does not define me. but the Democratic Party, I will say, is a compassionate party. It's one that stands for the working man. I'm a business owner, and I know, and I've worked all my life, and so that's why I do align myself with the Democratic Party from the compassionate side standpoint.
So, Mr. Spangler, what do you stand for? What makes you different? Why should we vote for you?
You should vote for me because I'm a fresh alternative, okay? I believe over the last 6, 7, 8 years, we have seen what our government has done. Our Congress has been termed a do-nothing Congress, and they have lived up to that title. I believe that I can bring transparency to our government. I believe that the fact that I am not owned by any group or PAC, it's absolutely crazy. You know, you look at what has been raised and spent. My opponent, our congressman, has raised $1,008,000, and he has spent $616,000 for a job that pays $174,000. You know, in business, that doesn't make sense. And I guess that's where my conservative background comes into play, because I believe that you cannot spend more money than you make. That's the way I run my business. And so I think that type of approach, the fact that I would not be owned, I would not be told, no one has been a big contributor to my campaign. Okay, it's been grassroots all the way. It's been the hardworking people of District 8. It's been people contributing $20 here. The teachers union has contributed $5,000. See, I'm very happy to sit up here, unlike my opponent, and talk about who's contributed to my campaign. That's what makes me different. And that's how I would bring transparency. I would let the people of District 8 know what's going on, and they would understand it in a simple language.
But beyond that, what would you be passionate about as far as if you got to Washington, D.C., what are the matters that concern you most? Well,
I'll go back to that word transparency, though. Okay, I mean, that's one thing that makes me passionate, because I believe that's our problem in Congress, is the fact that there are deals being made. Okay, there is a obstructionist government there. Both parties, not just one party, but both parties are not willing to work together. And that's one thing that would make me passionate, that makes me passionate, is the fact that I truly believe that we need to let you, the people back here in District 8, know what's going on. I think that's been the problem. You see things on the website, and you try to decipher it. It's all in Washingtonese. When I go to Washington, I guarantee my constituents that you will know on a daily basis what lobbyist walks into my office and what deal that they want to cut with me. You will know that. Okay, you don't know it now. I've been a true believer as far as what the Bible says. You know, the truth will set you free. And that's one way that we can become a better government, if we let this information get out and flow and you know what's happening. That's what makes me passionate, Kathy.
Thank you.
What do you think is the biggest threat facing the United States?
I believe the biggest threat that's facing, I mean, we can look at internal or external. External. External, well, of course, you know, terrorists, ISIS has certainly demonstrated the fact that they're a force to be dealt with. They're a little bit of a different threat from the standpoint that they have marketed themselves. I'm a sales and marketing guy, and so they've used Facebook and they've used the internet quite well to project themselves as far as to the world and to us. And so I think that we need to certainly look at the threat of ISIS. I think that what we're doing now is sort of a bandage approach. I'm very disappointed. Here again, I'm one of those angry voters that we find that, that feels that Congress has done nothing. Well, again, Congress has turned her back. Back in the summertime when ISIS was just coming up, and there was discussion there. There should have been a full debate between Congress and the President in regards to a clear-cut strategy. But what happened? I'll tell you what happened. They took 1 week, and they spent more time on trying to develop a resolution to sue our President than to sit down and develop a strategy against this threat. They basically threw some money to President Obama and said, here, you take care of it. Again, a political answer, okay, and hoping, really, the way the party looks at it, hoping that he fails so that they can make a big deal out of that. And so I truly feel that we've got to get back, and Congress needs to sit down and develop a full strategy. Just going through and bombing is not going to take care of this problem. Okay, we've got to get a little bit more serious. I would not suggest any boots in the ground. I'm tired of war. I believe Americans are tired of war. And so we need to certainly look how we can curtail this threat, but it's going to take a national debate to do it. Thank you.
How much of that, though, do you feel comes from the administration willing to work with Congress?
Well, Bill, I think it's been demonstrated over the past 6 years that Congress and the administration are not going to work together unless there's some ideological change there. Okay? You had a senator who's running in our next state that stood in front of the public back in 2012 and said, my number one objective is to make this president a one-term president. Now, is that a statesman? Is that a senator? Is that someone? Is that a servant that we have voted for? I mean, the other state has voted for to send to Washington to represent us as people and to go to work with the other members of Congress? Absolutely not. So we've got to have, we've got to take off that D button. We've got to take off that R button. And we've got to put on an A button. A meaning America. We're Americans, and we need to go and say, hey, we've got some problems here in our country, and it's with our government not getting together. Okay, it's almost like school. It's like kindergarten. I mean, we got to gather the children together. We've got to get them to get along. Well, Congress can't even do that. I can see why when they decide to end their session, they call it recess. Because that's what they certainly do. They go on recess like little children.
Going back to Tyler's question about the biggest threat, what do you think our biggest threat domestically is? Domestically,
I feel our debt. Okay, the $17 billion it's a disgrace. I mean, we are a great country, and we should have never let that debt get out of control. We should have never let that happen. We need to take a step back. It didn't happen overnight, Bill. Okay, and it's going to take some time to fix it. And there's going to have to be some things that we don't like to do. But again, Congress, when they don't like to do anything, what do? They kick the can down the road. Okay, our highway bill. Instead of sitting down during the summer just before recess, they decided, well, we'll just put that on the back burner, and in December we'll take care of it. Okay, kicking the can down the road. We've heard that over and over. We need to get Congress and get the President to say, hey, we've got to get these problems taken care of. And again, the transparency part that I brought up would be the way to do that. Because when Americans know what's going on and they hear the truth, all of a sudden the political realm changes.
Do you have some solutions? A gentleman earlier this evening told me there are 400,000 children every day in Indiana who go hungry. There is poverty in this nation, and I don't think we always recognize it. Do you have solutions for that, ideas for how to address that?
Well, I tell you, the Bible speaks that the poor we will always have with us. And it's our responsibility, just not the government, but it's our responsibility as human beings to help the poor. Sometimes we look to the government to take care of the poor, or try to do something about poverty. And where we know what God's Word says, and Jesus said, feed thy sheep. And those are things that as individuals that we need to do. We know children, our neighbors, we know people that are hurting. We have different church groups, different organizations. We need to do more of that. Okay, I feel that's one way of doing it. Some of our other government-type welfare programs that's been established over the past years, I think have been diluted. I think we need to go back and we need to make some changes there. I think that we need to, incentivize people to get off welfare and go to work. I don't think that you need to, unless you're disabled, because then we need to help the disabled. Disability, there's people that are disabled that are working harder than people that they have full use of their body. So I think that it takes a combination of some new government programs that will incentivize people to start working again, along with churches coming together and helping people. It's a two-pronged approach. Kathy?
My question is that people are changing Earth so much, warming and polluting it, that many scientists are calling the age we live in, or describing the age we live in as the age of humans. What do you think? What are your thoughts on clean energy sources?
Okay, it's Ty, right?
Yeah.
Ty? I grew up in the 60s, and before I moved down here 30 years ago, I lived in a little town called Monroe, Michigan. Had a river running through it. And there was paper mills. And those paper mills just dumped their pollution every day. Those rivers got so polluted that in the wintertime, and the winters were really bad down there, they didn't freeze over because there's no pollution. So anyone that says that we don't have a climate change problem, they really don't know what they're talking about. We do have a problem. And that we need to start listening to what the scientists have to say and some of the things, some of the recommendations. But unfortunately, it's a world problem. And there's some things that we can do as a country, but a lot of times there are other countries that will not go along with that.
You've got 10 seconds. I'm just going to let you say what you want. 7 seconds.
Well, again, glory to God. Glory to God. I thank the Lord for what He's doing in my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spangler. We will now take a short break while we reset the stage and prepare the questions from the audience.